Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around it's Science Fiction Saturday again, so I'm doing two kind of sort of related movies. The first one from 1960, the second one from 1964, both based on the same novel. And they are, he said, getting everything ready here, The Village of the Damned and Children of the Damned, taking two slightly divergent approaches to the same source material, which is John Wyndham's novel, The Midwich Cuckoos. And they both got a lot to say about really, really creepy children. So let's get started. Creepy children are kind of interesting. We've all been to a supermarket or out in public or just somewhere, and you see a kid and think, Jesus, that kid's creepy. And you're not wrong. But, there might be a nice kid, but still there are kids who are strikingly creepy looking and acting. Some of them, of course, are neurodivergent, and that is in no way their fault, but some of them are just weird. And I think that may be the source of John Wyndham's original novel, The Midwich Cuckoos. We're going to look at Village of the Damned first, directed by Wolf Riller, starring George Sanders, Barbara Shelley, and Michael Gwillim. It has one of the best early 1960s science fiction beginnings of any movie I can recall. Bucolic home county's village of Midwich, and everything is going well in the morning. The townspeople are out, the farmers are ploughing their fields, everything's hunky and dory, and suddenly everybody falls asleep. Something has fallen over the village of Midwich, which puts everybody into a kind of coma for a number of hours. This, of course, draws the attention of the authorities, because why wouldn't it? And a few hours later, everybody wakes up and they have a few side effects, headaches, and they feel kind of very cold. Well, they are in England after all. Then things start going weird. Every woman who is possible to be pregnant in the village of Midwich becomes pregnant at the same time. And this is where it gets really interesting, because there are so many cultural undercurrents. You've got to remember, this is 1960. This is before the pill. This is way before women weren't treated badly for having children out of wedlock. And Luna is here. Hey, baby. So the kind of lord of the manor, in a sense, is Professor Gordon Zellaby, played by George Sanders, whose beautiful wife, Anthea, played by Barbara Shelley, turns up knocked up. Gordon's kind of pleased because he's an older guy and he doesn't know whether his tadpoles are wriggling enough, and suddenly his wife is pregnant. He's very happy about it until they start linking together the mysterious comas with all the other pregnancies and with Anthea's in particular. Now, I've got more to say about that in a moment. Yes? And I'm going to pause while I let her out. So there's one villager who's a merchant seaman, has been away for a number of months, and his wife turns up pregnant with inconvenient timing. There's a young girl who is a virgin who turns up pregnant as well. And they go to the local priest to talk about that, along with the local doctor, played by Lawrence Naismith. Not sure why you'd go to a priest, and again that shows the difference between now and then. What the hell do priests know about virgin births? They believe in them. And there are all these little cultural bits and pieces. All the local village men end up spending their nights grimly at the pub, drinking beers and not talking to anyone. But Gordon and Anthea work through it as a relationship. Now, this is where I've got a problem with this movie, because there's a lot of classism in this film, particularly that Gordon and Anthea, being educated, rich and kind of privileged people, upper class you might say, work through their issues and work through their relationship successfully, because of course they're upper class and they're rich and they're educated, whereas everybody who is less educated doesn't talk to their wife about it, doesn't understand it, and doesn't kind of work through their issues the way many couples do when they have problems in their marriage. The assumption made by this film is that only rich people are able to negotiate difficult emotional terrains in a relationship, which basically sucks. But leaving that classism aside, the rate of revelation is really interesting. First off, you get the people being knocked out. Then you get the pregnancies, which are accelerated, and the development of the fetuses is quite fast. And then you get the birth of the children, who all have blonde hair and all have striking eyes and all have the ability to control the minds of other people and to read them. That's not something kids normally do. The kids grow up at an accelerated rate. They will start dressing the same, which is kind of odd because they dress like private school educated toffs. So they've all got their little ties and their suits and their jackets and all that kind of thing. Be more interesting if they decided to dress in a non-conventional way. But maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe part of the plan is to blend in a way that seems socially acceptable to the people whose nests the cuckoos have been placed in. That's always a possibility there. There are other things about them. The hair of the children has an odd cross-section that's shaped like a letter D, which is not known in any other human beings. So as the children grow older, their powers develop, and they start taking action against people who wish them ill. And that then leads Gordon Zellaby to think it through and decide what he believes about these children and what he can do about it. The military gets involved and has certain plans about the children, and Gordon asks for a compromise where he educates them in the local schoolhouse, and they sleep there. That becomes their home. And he has misguided idealism about these children, which another character in the second movie does as well, where he believes if he can talk them around, he believes he can instill human kinds of morals, and by that they mean English mid-20th century morality to these children who are beyond him. Their minds are beyond him, their understanding of what's going on around them is beyond him, and they are a group mind. What one child knows, they all know. And that is something that the prosaic minds of the people in and around Midwich just can't comprehend. There are some pretty spectacular deaths that occur as people feel threatened by the children and decide to take action on them. And ultimately, it is the idealistic but misguided Gordon who has to try to resolve the issue with the children of Midwich and resolve the problems that the human race has with these very strange and very dangerous beings who are not human. So this one works. It's in beautiful black and white within the limitations of 1960s censorship and within the limitations of the cultural viewpoint of 1960. It does really well, apart from that one caveat I've got about the classism in the movie. George Sanders is really good as Gordon, and he gets a role with a bit more meat on it than a number of the roles he got in the 1960s, and pretty much almost all the roles he got after winning an Academy Award for All About Eve. There are some exceptions to that. Roberto Rossellini's Voyage to Italy, he was great in that with Ingrid Bergman and a few others, but this one's got a little bit of meat on the bone, and he plays the idealistic and hopeful Gordon quite well. And Barbara Shelley and he have a nice chemistry as well. Her Anthea is pretty much limited by the limitations of 1960 English custom, so she gets to have her own say but is still secondary to the men who are dealing with this issue, which is kind of weird because in essence this is very much an issue that affects women much more than it does men. Lawrence Staysmith does a nice turn as the Doctor too. He's pretty much seen everything and done everything, and he is quite good at being a right-hand man to Zellaby and understanding the children and finding out more about them as Gordon does himself. So the cast and the ensemble work really well. And I was kind of thinking back, this is a movie that plays scarier to a 1960 audience than it does to a contemporary one. There's a whole bunch of issues here. There's the idea of your wife being pregnant but it not being yours, and that's very much a kind of cuckoldry kind of thing, which was very much cultural taboo in that time and is still to this day in various cultures. There's the idea of miscegenation as well. You know, these kids are not from the same species as normal human children. So it brings in a little bit of the miscegenation viewpoint there. There's also the fear that people have of juvenile delinquency, which is a really big moral panic in America, particularly in the 1950s. And there are lots of ways in which the novel and this movie really skewer the cultural vulnerabilities of the time and place in which they are. It works really well. It makes Zellaby a really interesting kind of tragic hero in a sense. His idealism and his optimism about morality is his weak spot, and he only realises it right toward the end of the film. There's a bit at the end where the eyes of the children dart out of the burning schoolhouse where they've been destroyed, giving us the implication that their minds might have gone somewhere else. That doesn't follow up with the second movie, which is not a direct sequel to the first one, but I think it may have been something they really shouldn't have put in there. Yeah, it looks spooky, but I don't think it helps the narrative and helps us with the closure that we get from the ending of the movie. Then we go to 1964 for Children of the Damned, directed by Anton M. Leader. And this one's got a great cast. In fact, I think it's got a stronger cast as the first one. You got Ian Hendry, Alan Badell, Alfred Burke, Barbara Ferris. You get Patrick Wymark turning up as a military leader toward the end of the film as well. In the opening credits of the film, it says it's a direct sequel to the novel The Midwich Cuckoos and skirts around the movie Village of the Damned. In this one, the United Nations have got together and done a standardized IQ test for children all over the world, and they've found 6 children who are off the scale intelligent. They're all the same age, and as the narrative tells us later on, all of their mothers were pregnant without having had congress with a man. There's a racial diversity in these kids. They're from all over the world, and they're being studied by a pair of guys, a geneticist played by Alan Badell and a Welsh psychologist played by Ian Hendry, who live together. The implications are made but not really underlined that they're a couple. And people go, well, they've got separate bedrooms, and Alan Badell's character is slightly flirty with one of the women in the movie, but being gay was illegal in the UK. You could go to jail for it. So having separate bedrooms was a protective measure that was used at the time for same-sex couples to protect them from the force of the law. Of course, lesbianism wasn't illegal at the time because Queen Victoria back in the day didn't believe that lesbians existed, which is the kind of take you can get when you live an isolated life of privilege. But in this one, it makes the relationships more complex, and it makes the ideological differences between the two men a little deeper. So they interview the kid who gets the IQ test in England, and his mother's a sex worker. They don't actually say that. They say photographic model, but it's pretty obvious that photographic model is a euphemism. And he controls her. He manipulates her. He tells her what to do, and she hates him. And it gets to the point in the narrative where he gets her to walk in a trance in front of a car and end up in hospital deeply injured. Paul's aunt is then brought in to look after him, and she ends up being the caretaker for the children as they take sanctuary. So all the kids are brought from around the world to London because 2 of them are in London already, and the plan is for them to be studied by United Nations scientists in order to kind of figure out what's going on. The kids run away and take sanctuary in a disused derelict church, and they use the English kid Paul's aunt as their kind of guardian and the adult that helps them. Now, these kids are spookier than the kids in the first movie because the kids in the first movie have all got the same hairstyle. They are a group mind, but they look artificial in a sense. But in this one, the racially diverse group of kids don't speak unless they have to. When they want to communicate with a human, they normally do it telepathically. Only when they need to talk to groups of people do they actually speak. So, of course, the intelligence and the military are involved, and they find out that because the kids are a group mind, and if one of them knows something, they all do, they're all a security risk to the whole of the world and may destabilise the very tentative and careful international order during the early stages of détente. So those international tensions increase. The kids take sanctuary, and some spooks go in and try to get them out and make the mistake of shooting their dog. Now, John Wick fans will know you don't shoot the dog in any movie because somebody is going to come after you if you do. And the kids do and force the spooks to kill each other. And then when the army decides to raid the church, the kids create a sonic weapon which basically paralyzes and tortures people with sound, which they've clutched together out of a piece of stained glass and little bits of electronic components. So these kids are crazily far advanced. A geneticist posits the idea that these kids are human, but they're about 1 million years advanced from current humanity. And so they are, in that sense, our kids, but just very far advanced through an unknown method by unknown beings. And that makes it even more mysterious. In both of the films, we don't know what caused it. We know that something has acted upon the groups of people so that they have these children, but we don't know who or why or how. And that's kind of interesting too. That mystery at the centre of both of these movies makes them a little more delicious. The couple played by Ian Hendry and Alan Bedell have a disagreement. Alan Bedell's character is in favour of just wiping the kids out, whereas Ian Hendry's character says they're children. We've got to understand them, we've got to learn from them, we've got to figure this out. So in a sense, he's like Gordon Zellaby. He believes that these kids are redeemable and does it for more grounded reasons and scientific reasons than Gordon Zellaby's natural idealism. And that makes it kind of interesting. The relationship between the two men breaks up in violence because of their differing viewpoints on children, which kind of parallels the way some male-female couples have disagreements about children. And I think that parallel may well be a deliberate choice by the filmmakers. And again, you've got to remember this is 2 years before homosexuality was legalised, or at least decriminalised in the UK. So the relationship is broken down by this. And the military and the governments of the world decide that what they're going to do is basically blow up the church. So explosives are set in the sewers beneath the church. There are mortars and bazookas that's ready, and a communication system is set up to coordinate all of this. And when it comes to the inevitable climax, it's not too much of a spoiler to say that the church gets blown up, because I've already said it, I think. It's set off by accident. There's a short circuit because a screwdriver falls against a couple of contacts and sets off the alarm, and the kids are destroyed by accident, just at the point at which the scientists are starting to understand what these kids are, and that will then give them an approach that would work in negotiating with these kids, even though of course they have killed people on numerous occasions. There's a moral ambiguity to these movies where the people who are on the side of light, the idealists, are willing to ignore the deaths of people because the murderers present as human children. And that makes it really interesting, and the morality of it very complex in a fascinating way. These movies really do punch hard into the cultural assumptions of the time in which they were made. And that makes them much more fascinating than a lot of other science fiction movies, particularly of the 1950s and 1960s, where there's an alien menace. The characters are more grounded, the characters feel more realistic, and the questions they're raising are not easily answered in the narrative. And Children of the Damned has the best tagline on its poster of any movie I can remember. I love the tagline on it. Beware the eyes that paralyze. It's just the best and creepiest tagline I know. I remember seeing a trailer for it at the cinema when I was a kid, and it scared the shit out of me. The glowing eyes on the kids really freaked me out, and it's probably another reason why I love the movie. But of the two, I think I do like Children of the Damned more. It's a little more grounded, having the London locations, particularly warehouses and a derelict church and things like that, really give the movie an interesting feel. And having those characters who are slightly complex and very different from a lot of the characters you see in other movies of this type of the time means that it really works. I mean, Ian Hendry's fantastic in it, Alan Bedell's fantastic in it. It's something special, I think, and because it does dig at the very heart of being human, these movies are going to be watchable for a very long time, and you really should have them. This is an old English release of the two movies together, which I picked up for, I think I paid a little bit more than I should have for it at the time. I'm sure there's been a Blu-ray release of them afterwards, but I don't necessarily know that you need to have it on Blu-ray, because it upscaled quite well on my 55-inch 4K TV. And the inside covers are a little bit ordinary, but I'll show them to you anyway. There's one for Village of the Damned, which looks a bit washed out, but that's just the way they printed it. And there's the very ordinary cover art that they put on to Children of the Damned. So they're both worth watching. They're both fantastic films. And because of those universal themes, I think they really do have legs. Thanks a lot for sticking around this far. I'm going to just tell you that we went to the cinema this morning. And if you're in the mood for a really dumb, fun, science fiction adjacent adventure, we saw the Meg 2, The Trench, with Jason Statham in it. It's also got Cliff Curtis in it and a bunch of other people. If you want a dumb, fun adventure movie at the cinema, you can do a lot worse than this one. And you've got to remember, with the strikes going on among actors and screenwriters at the moment, you're not going to get a lot of blockbusters for the foreseeable future. So you might as well go and have a bit of fun watching this one, because it is dumb, groovy fun. You got giant sharks, you got octopuses, you've got interesting, fun characters who know what kind of movie they're in. We went down and saw it at Miller's Junction in the reading cinemas with the reclining seats, and it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. It runs slightly less than 2 hours, so it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's not a 3-hour blockbuster, but it is a lot of fun. But anyway, having said that and recommended that, if you want to support the channel, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by two other means. First off, you can become a channel member on YouTube and get some icons you can use when you comment on the channel. You also get access to my monthly Spotify playlist of movie-related music. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. So the next video I'm doing is my alphabetical hidden gems. I'm up to the letters O and P, and I've got tons of movies within those letters to recommend as hidden gems. After that, I'm not sure what I'm doing on Wednesday, but I'm sure I'll find something. But until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some creepy movies with really scary children on them. You can also add the bad C to that, and I'll catch you next time.